At the exact instant when the bodies decelerate, something deeper awakens, a silent whisper that crosses the skin and reaches the soul. It is there, in the humid space between silence and the beating of the heart, that the masculine unconscious finds a voice. You feel that wordless echo in your chest, as if an inner flame knew that something was revealed and at the same time kept. It is in the post-sex that his true essence shows itself, stripped of the masks that desire constructed. If that kind of reflection genuinely touches you, perhaps this is your place. Consider subscribing to the channel. Carl Jung said that the symbol of the sexual encounter is more important than the act itself, because it is in it that the masculine unconscious speaks louder. Think of the encounter not merely as movement, but as ceremony. Each sigh, each look, each pause carries a secret sign. It is when the corporeal rite ends that the man's psychic content overflows, revealing fears, hopes, and shadows that he does not always understand. You feel this revelation in the weight of his shoulders, in the way his hands seek support in an unconscious gesture. The post-sex moment is when the mask of desire falls and the real man appears, often without knowing that he is revealing himself. He does not need to speak. The body speaks for him. The tense breathing, the turning away of the gaze, the silence that echoes through the room, all dialogue with you, if you learn to listen. You, who so often felt the absence of voice, can now read the between the lines of the unspoken, and by understanding this silent terrain, you discover his emotional geography, whether there is desert or sea. The woman who learns to decode what he communicates in that moment discovers where he stands emotionally and what that bond truly means to him. It is not about interpreting an isolated gesture, but feeling the complete narrative that unfolds in the shared silence. You realize that the heat that still lingers in the sheets is not only physical but symbolic. It confirms or questions the value of that encounter for his psyche. It is a text written in touches and pauses, which only sensitivity can translate. Erich Fromm reminded us that mature love is recognized in continuity and not in explosion. The post-sex moment is when that continuity reveals itself. Is there a path of care extending beyond the fever of pleasure, or will only the cold trace of the body delivered to chance remain? You feel the promise of a journey or the abrupt detour that signals a dead end. The bond is not sealed during sex. It is confirmed or undone afterward, where the unconscious acts without filters and where the true emotional field manifests. It is in the serene touch you offer after the climax that the psychic alliance is sealed. It is in the patience of silence that the soul's contract is written. And you, woman of deep soul, are co-author of that energetic record, capable of maintaining or dissolving the magnet that united you. There is a quietness that descends after the last breath of desire, like a heavy veil that envelops the body and the soul. In that instant, many women realize that silence hurts more than any word of rejection. You feel a void echoing in your chest, a cold that runs down your spine, as if you had been expelled from a place you yourself helped build. That void is not mere absence of sound. It is lack of return. It is the echo of an affection that did not sustain the promise it made to the body. It is there, in the aftermath of the encounter, that the childhood wound opens, where love was given without permanence, where the inner girl learned that affection can vanish as quickly as the warmth of arms. When he pulls away without looking back, a knot tightens in the throat. Something tightened, and you fell silent. You remember the times when you offered everything of yourself and received only fleeting smiles. The woman who carries the abandonment complex sees herself in that reunion, the sensation of having been an instrument to sate an impulse and then discarded. It is the echo of the girl who was never attended to, of the child who learned to love the silence of absence as the only form of continuation. You carried the weight of that memory in your body, as if each cell knew that affection can be as fleeting as the breath of life that animates the lungs. The pain of being used is not limited to the intimate moment. It reverberates in the skin, in the hands that tremble at the memory, and in the image in the mirror, where the soul seeks consolation in the face. You waited, and no one returned. Each wait was like a withheld sigh, a mute invitation for that space not to remain empty. But the room remains silent, and the echo of the unmade bed screams loneliness. It is there that trauma settles, in the contrast between the depth of the encounter and the immensity of abandonment. You realize that loving without guarantee is trusting in the eternity of a second. The man who disappears emotionally after pleasure is not only cold, often he reproduces his own fear of commitment. That withdrawal activates your abandonment complex because it touches the oldest wound. You loved with everything, and were left hanging. The woman who felt the warm touch of desire and shortly after, the ice of oblivion, knows there is nothing more cruel than being halfway to someone else. It is the sign that the bond was not sealed, but merely tested, and that you received no sign of return. If this resonated with you in some way, leave a like. It shows that these conversations are necessary. Thus remains the invisible scar that reminds you that love, for many, learned to be conditional. You feel in your chest that giving yourself completely can mean risking your own existence. However, it is in that very wound that the possibility of healing lives, the awareness that your surrender is not tied to another's permanence. Each sigh of absence carries a lesson about boundaries, about the reverberation of affection that need not be hostage to return. It is by understanding pain that you can learn to welcome it without being consumed by it, finding in the silence your own voice that calls for support and truth. In this place of inner listening, trauma transforms into guide. You discover that before seeking completeness in another, you must recognize the wholeness already present in yourself. The woman who survived many post-act silences knows she is not broken, only taught. And by bringing that memory into the light, she offers her inner child a new glimpse of safety, that the deepest love is the one that embraces herself even when the other withdraws. In the penumbra of the room warmed by what passed, he seems to become another presence, absent despite the proximity of bodies. Jung spoke of the archetype of the fragmented lover, that one who lives divided between physical surrender and the fear of emotional fusion. It is as if, when touched in his flesh, his soul recoils to shadowy zones where intimacy frightens him. You feel his retreat like a cold wind after the warmth of an embrace. You perceive the contraction in the slight arching of his shoulders in an almost imperceptible movement. It is in that instant that the man's internal myth of division reveals itself. He allows himself to feel the flesh, but fears the soul being invaded. Full surrender is an invitation not everyone accepts. Some men experience pleasure, and at the same time read in that ecstasy a risk of losing control over themselves. The sensation of vulnerability becomes agonizing, and flight is an unconscious act of self-protection. It is as if the heart needs a wall not to dissolve. You feel that barrier without words, for it rises in the silence of his glances and in the hands that pull away before the last sigh is exhaled. Something in me doesn't want to go that deep. The abrupt gesture of distance seems to say, withdrawal does not always mean disinterest. There is a shadow of fear that hangs in the masculine unconscious, the fear of a fusion that would annul his singularity. The male psyche, fragmented by social expectations and old wounds, keeps part of itself in reserve. When the rite of sex culminates in the post-act, that reserve reveals itself. It is an echo of ancestral stories in which the man needed to maintain autonomy, the free space to think without the chains of bond. You perceive that tension in his body, like a rope stretched between the urge of touch and the desire to regain his own rhythm. For the sensitive woman, it is crucial not to personalize that movement. The woman who understands where her pain ends and his shadow begins finds freedom to embrace without losing herself. You feel in your chest, it is not about you, but about an interior universe he does not always know how to explore. In that instant, your loving and calm presence becomes a mirror, offering a safe place for him to return to his own center. You do not call him back with words, but with a posture that says, I am here. You can return whenever you wish. There is contained beauty in that retreat. It reveals the path to what truly matters. If fear manifests, it is a sign that something precious must be protected, his soul. Withdrawal is an implicit request for patience, an invitation for you to remain whole without demanding a response. You remember that silence also speaks, and that the space you create around him can dissolve the barriers that time imposed. In that breath, the bond has the opportunity to reinforce itself from the inside out, without haste, without pressure, only with presence. You feel that this recognition brings lightness to your own body. Inner listening intensifies, allowing you to see the man beyond his movements. He is a being who seeks, above all, emotional security. When he retreats, it is not to abandon, but to test if there is enough shelter. The key test happens in the mute corner where he finds his thoughts, his doubts, his oldest fears. If there is silent embrace there, the missing step can be taken. And when the man realizes there is no rush, that the emotional space remains open, he returns. He returns with more cautious hands, perhaps with eyes that ask forgiveness without fully understanding what to request. He returns because, having touched the limit of his own inner loneliness, he recognizes that fullness is not only in physical impulse, but in the secure reflection he finds in her gaze. You, by welcoming that divided man, offer the chance for fragmentation to become integration, and for the archetype of the fragmented lover to give way to the whole lover, that one who knows how to inhabit his own desire without fear of union. At the moment that follows the climax, there is a delicate territory that reveals itself between still warm skin and the echo of heartbeats. It is this sacred interstice that invites you to seal the bond, not with words but with a gesture that speaks directly to the masculine unconscious. The gentle touch that rests in the center of his chest, there where the symbol of home burns silently, has the power to activate deep ancestral memories, as if you were igniting a spark of belonging. Remain present in silence and offer your pulse so that he recognizes the beat that echoes in you. It is not necessary to promise loyalty nor to draw futures. The symbolic presence is enough. By resting your hand without haste, you are saying, "I am here whole without demanding return." That invisible phrase crosses the skin and reaches the core of his being, invoking the archetype of the whole woman, that one who offers emotional sustenance without consuming the other's energy. It is in that silent yet potent activation that the bond finds fertile soil to germinate. You, who carry the wisdom of ancient muses, know that healing silence can say more than any vow. By maintaining the gaze light, almost devout, you become guardian of the emotional space. The man, touched by the truth of that wordless embrace, accesses a primordial memory, a sacred fire that never goes out, but remains warmed by whoever chooses to stay. However, do not be mistaken. That gesture is not about neediness, but about profound strength. You rise whole, even when you were crushed. Share this video with another woman who needs to hear this today. The symbolic touch inaugurates a territory where his unconscious meets yours. Each centimeter of skin you preserve by holding that contact creates an energetic field that frames the bond. It is like keeping the flame of Hestia alive, not to seduce, but to maintain the warmth of the psychic home. He feels, even without words, that there are no traps nor hurry, only an invitation to inhabit together a space of trust. When his body relaxes under your hand, you witness the dissolution of internal barriers. The walls raised by fear of fusion begin to crumble because they find embrace in a gesture that demands no explanation. You offer the mirror in which he sees himself whole, a man who loves, but also needs to recognize himself worthy of care. That mirror has the faint glow of one who does not judge, but reflects the other's dignity. It is in that moment that the bond is confirmed. He does not anchor himself in a verbal promise or in a pact made in urgency, but in the echo of the silence you share. His unconscious records every nuance of that gesture as a sign that care exists beyond the carnal act. He returns more genuinely, bringing in his eyes the silent gratitude of one who was seen in his complexity. You realize there is nothing more powerful than remaining whole. There is nothing more transformative than activating the symbolic content that dwells in the man. It is the breath that reignites the internal myth, the one that never extinguishes when touched in the right place. In the softness of that gesture, in the light weight of your presence, the bond need not be forged. It reveals itself. And upon witnessing that revelation, you understand that sealing is not an isolated act, but a continuous ritual woven between pauses, looks, and hands that do not let go. It is there that true recognition is born, the one that occurs in the intimate unconscious, long after words have been lost. There exists an instant as tenuous as it is decisive in the post-act, when his mind divides between sensation and thought, between the peace it finds and the dread of revealing himself whole. In that liminal space, he does not think in terms of logic or strategy, but the soul speaks through the synapses, and the body translates that intimate conversation. You notice, in the head resting on the pillow, in the sigh that lingers, in the residue of warmth still burning in the chest, that something older awakens. It is as if, for a moment, he realizes that pleasure is not merely a physical phenomenon, but a portal to his own depth. Some feel relief, the relief of not having to keep their guard up, of being able to lower the curtain of daily fears and just breathe. You hear that relief in the soft echo of the exhalation, as if the body recovered a breath that had been held throughout the journey to the climax. He realizes that, at least for an instant, he does not have to be the protector, the provider, the strong one, and that revelation can come with a genuine sense of rest. Others, however, experience shame. The shame of having allowed themselves to be seen vulnerable, of having offered to the world a fragment of their psychic nakedness without the clothes of rationality. When he feels that he exposed old wounds, his face may flush, his eyes turn to the void, and his breathing seeks a new rhythm. It is a moment when the unconscious sends warning signals. You were exposed too much. You observe that tension in the slight goosebumps on the skin, in the slow gesture of covering the shoulders, as if the hands wanted to erase invisible marks. There are men who live in the fear of a connection that transcends the physical. It is a silent fear, whispered by the memory of past abandonments or by the weight of social expectations that dwell in an internal shadow. The psyche interprets emotional fusion as a threat to autonomy, and he feels torn between the desire for permanence and the dread of losing his own inner space. You sense that fear in the irregular beat of his heart, in the hesitation of the touch that retreats. He may remain motionless, floating between the warmth of her body and the cold of the world waiting outside. But there are those who experience there an unprecedented connection, the sensation of being understood in their depths. This feeling is born not only from ecstasy, but from the quality of the encounter that preceded it. Exchanged glances, sincere conversations, touches that listen to the body. When all these elements align, the silence after sex can become a dialogue of souls. You witness that awakening in the tender shine that gleams in his eyes, in the gentle way he tilts his head closer, without hurry, allowing himself simply to exist by your side. What a man thinks in that moment depends greatly on his emotional maturity and the affective territory he has already traversed. Many have no words to name the internal whirlwind, and so they remain silent, believing that silence spares confessions they cannot articulate. And yet, silence is loaded with meaning. You feel that what was not said echoes more strongly than any phrase. It is there that the poetry and transformative power of the afterward reside. When you maintain that welcoming presence and avoid filling that space with your own insecurities, you offer him a pure reflection of understanding. That offering allows the whirlwind to calm, for the multiple internal voices to harmonize into a single cadence. You hear his rhythm, and thus he begins to perceive that he can think and feel without needing to explain himself. At that point, the bond consolidates from the inside out. The unconscious reaction to the deep encounter translates into a state of lightness. The body rests, the mind sighs, and the heart finds space to beat without fear. You then realize that the man who feels something real often does not know how to name that serenity, but he knows he was marked. It is an invisible seal engraved on the soul, which makes the urge to return to that space of truth irresistible. The quality of that post-sex does not arise from the orgasm itself, but from the affective ground cultivated before, during, and above all, after the act. When his voice, even in silence, responds to the symbolic gesture of presence, you witness the silent dance of bodies that recognize the other as mirror. And then finally, what he truly thinks is, "Here I can be whole." In the penumbra of what remains of the physical flame, another fire emerges, the sacred burning that pulses in the inner temple of each man. In Greek mythology, Hestia was the guardian of that fire, not a seductress, but the sustainer of the flame that gives life to the home. She did not conquer with promises of adventure, but kept the warmth that welcomed without consuming. It is in her that we find the deep archetype of the woman who seals the bond after sex. She does not need to bind, because the warmth she ignites is self-sustaining and generous. That mythical fire resides in the symbolic gesture, born of shared silence. When you rest your hand on his chest, you are not merely touching the heart region. You are invoking Hestia's presence, accessing an archetypal field that transcends the physical act. It is an invisible ritual, woven between measured breathing and the vibrant heartbeat that echoes in both. You become, in that instant, priestess of an inner flame that does not go out at the end of the carnal rite, but renews itself in attentive care. Imagine the scene. The room immersed in soft shadows, only the half-light filtered through the curtain. His body still vibrates with the heat of desire, but it is in your firm and compassionate gaze that the true seat of the bond fixes itself. You remain there, motionless in the gesture, a haven of serene presence. Jungian teaching shows that symbols can activate archetypal images without words, and, in that silent proof, he reads the evidence that care has no hidden agenda, but springs from the generosity of your own interior, completeness. The sealing touch is not a passing trend. It is the breath of an immortal flame that in every culture represented enduring affection. Consider the symbol of the hearth at the center of the home, around which all eyes turn to share stories and nourish collective cohesion. The woman who acts as Hestia in the post-sex recreates that psychic hearth. She does not demand an audience, does not shout for praise, does not engage in extracting promises. She simply remains, living, flame, and the man, feeling that serene warmth, returns to the sacred circle you built. It is not about manipulation nor submission. It is about offering a mirror of fire. He sees himself reflected in the glow of welcome and realizes he can approach without fear of being consumed. That recognition creates a magnet that does not fade over time, for each man's internal myth carries the atavistic memory of a safe place where one can be vulnerable without fear of destruction. When that place exists, return becomes inevitable. You understand then that the bond is not tied but cultivated. In the silence that follows the surrender, observe subtle signs: the body that relaxes, the look that finds yours with silent gratitude, the gesture that slides to maintain your contact. Each of these movements dialogues with the inner fire, confirming that there resides a space of belonging. You do not need to speak. The bond is assured by the invisible touch of symbol. It is as if ancestral. Embers lit in Hestia once again illuminate the present and make post-sex a ritual of mutual growth. The man who feels this does not question future promises. He senses that a continuous thread links physical surrender to emotional construction. He returns not only to the body, but to the inner space you prepared. With each subsequent touch, each prolonged look, the myth regains its potency. The sex is over, but the fire endures. That fire is invincible, for it is not sustained by human urgency, but by the eternity of the archetype. You, by offering that space, inhabit your own archetype of the whole woman and modern Hestia. It is in the unhurried gesture, in the touch that demands no immediate return, that alchemy happens. What seemed fleeting takes the shape of a temple, and what was a rite of pleasure becomes a rite of reunion. That reunion echoes in his subjective memory as a song of welcome, resonating when his mind seeks shelter on life's cold days. Thus, the internal myth is updated and strengthened. The man remembers where he came from, the warmth that sustains him, and the silent promise of an emotional home that never goes out. And when he returns, he comes back to the hearth you kindled, ready to share not only the body's fire, but the heart's flame. In the invisible touch that seals, you teach his unconscious that true intimacy does not exhaust itself in the body, but finds its most fertile ground in the symbolic realm born of mutual care. And with each silent gesture, you reinforce the certainty that in the encounter of bodies the bond endures, because it was sealed on the sacred altar of the Hestia archetype. In the quiet that follows the post-sex ritual, the memories of the encounter continue to pulse like living embers. You feel the gentle warmth remain in your chest, even when the bodies part. It is in that shared space that the shadows of the unconscious meet the light of conscious presence. Carl Jung said that every encounter is also an encounter of shadows, and in the silence afterward, those shadows reveal themselves in full contour. You notice in your own heartbeat the resonance of that deep encounter because it left marks that do not fade with time. Clarissa Pinkola Estes reminds us that the woman who knows the silence afterward as a portal understands the other's soul without needing to ask. It is as if you hold an invisible key before you, capable of opening his intimate sanctuary. That key is not born of words, but of the serene way you inhabit the post-climax space. Each of your gestures, however minimal, becomes an instrument of symbolic reading. The soft resting of the hand, the look that welcomes silence, the measured rhythm of breathing that invites permanence. It is in that soul cadence that the bond is sealed, growing in depth with each shared breath. The bond is sealed not in the intensity of pleasure, but in the presence afterward. It is there, when the bodies rest and the souls converse in silence, that the true bond is forged. You recall how the symbol of the sexual encounter surpasses the act itself, because in the encounter reside the archetypal images that govern the union of two interior worlds. When that encounter is followed by the silent embrace that reinforces the continuity of care, the effect extends beyond the room, following each of you in the days to come. It is there that the man feels whether he was only body or was touched in the soul. The body fades, but the emotional echo remains. You perceive in his everyday gesture, a look, a smile, the affection that appears without apparent reason, the invisible seal imprinted by the care you offered. That seal manifests in small actions, in kindnesses born of the recognition that a true encounter involves respect, listening, and reverence for the other's inner territory. And the woman who knows how to remain there, whole, symbolic, true, does not need to ask for bond. She becomes the bond itself, you who brought Hestia's healing strength to the post-act. Keep the sacred flame of affection alive. Each time you choose to stay without hurry, without pressure, you water the ground where passion and trust bloom together. In that silent alliance he finds home and, upon returning, knows that it will not be only desire that calls him, but the welcoming presence he knew at his most vulnerable hour. If something within you opened with this video, write in the comments. Sometimes sharing also heals, and if you want to continue this soul journey, we are here whenever you want to return.